Mr. Paul?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Chairman Greenspan, I too am not pleased with the Fed, but my approach will be slightly different. While here in the Congress over the past several years, there's been several things that have been pointed out to me that we shouldn't bring up at committees. One is the Constitution, and the other, of course, before the Banking Committee is dollar policy. You explained earlier the dollar policy, the Secretary of Treasury speaks for the dollar. And I find that interesting and a bit ironic that you have the monopoly control over the money, creating new money and control over the interest rates, but you don't speak for the dollar, and that's deferred to the Treasurer. And we know that, but I think that's sort of academic anyway, because ultimately the number of dollars you create and the marketplace determines the value of the money, so no matter what you say or the Secretary of the Treasury says won't matter a whole lot. But dealing with the Constitution, I'd like to point out to my colleagues and others that the Constitution is explicit on the type of monetary system that we have, or are supposed to have. And for the past 32 years, we've been operating with a fiat monetary system, and it hasn't done well. And history has shown that fiat money never does well, and it always ends badly. And we may be seeing the beginnings of the end of that system, not only nationally but internationally. And I think that's something we should give consideration for, but not particularly today, because I have been told that these parts of the Constitution, such as declaring war, are anachronistic, and we just ignore them. And I find that sort of sad, but that's the way it is around the Congress too often. But also, I'd like to point out that you're concerned about deflation. Of course, your definition of deflation is slightly different than the free market definition, because we believe deflation requires the shrinkage of the money supply and the increase in the purchasing power of the dollar. But anyway, you show that decreasing prices are a threat, and therefore you have to print faster than ever, and you've been doing a pretty good job there. Since January of 2001, you've taken M3 from 6.5 trillion up to 8.2 trillion. That's a pretty hefty hunk of new money, $2.3 trillion of new money, and hasn't done a heck of a lot of good. So I think that it's interesting that you have this concern and you excuse yourself and you plan to print whatever is necessary. At the same time, you come to us and say your biggest concern, and this too is entertaining or interesting, that the chairman of the Federal Reserve isn't talking so much about monetary policy, he's talking about energy prices. Because they're going down and they're deflationary? No, because they're going up and they're inflationary. So I don't know how we can have it both ways. First, we worry about deflation. In the next breath, we worry about inflation. Now, my concern and my question, or something I would like you to make a comment on, deals with the fairness of this system. For instance, I think this is very unfair to the elderly. In the old days, under the free market, we encouraged savings. The elderly have CDs. They used to make 6%. Now they make less than 1% sometimes. They have lost their purchasing power. At the same time, they're suffering from the increase in the cost of living because of energy prices going up. And just because low interest rates might help the stock market and might help the housing market doesn't seem to me to be fair to the elderly who have saved their money, suffer from the inflation that still exists, at the same time they lose their income. And for that reason, I think the system that we work with now is very biased. It's biased toward those who want to consume. We have a system, both the Treasury and the Fed encourages the Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac program of increasing equities and then borrowing against it and then suffering the consequences.
And your question?
I'd like you to comment on the fairness of what you're doing to the elderly who lose their income.
Well, we have lowered interest rates quite considerably since early 2001. As best we can judge, the consequence of that has been a fairly dramatic expansion in housing, house turnover, and market values of homes from which a significant amount of equity has been extracted. All of that has supported the economy and kept it from edging lower after the very significant shocks that we had as a consequence of the post-2000 period. As far as I can judge, we have had a really quite extraordinary period, having suffered all of those shocks, and still show a resilience and an expansion which, even though below our desires, has been positive. We had a very shallow recession, and as a consequence, the recovery has been quite modest. Now, we can't have it both ways. In other words, you cannot both have high interest rates, which give significant incomes to those who hold interest instruments, and low interest rates, which will stabilize the economy and expand it. We at the Federal Reserve have chosen to lower the rate structure because we judged that that was the most appropriate way to stabilize what had been an unstable system. And in retrospect, the policy seems to have been quite effective.
Ms. Maloney.
Thank you, Madam Chairman and Mr. Greenspan.